In this video, we're going to see how we can automate the release of acquired resources in Java applications. So I'm going to start here in TextMate with this code sample that reads and displays the first line from a local text file. But before I get into the code sample, let's first have a brief discussion on some best practices we should employ for resource management in general. Now, whenever we acquire a particular resource, we must always release it once we're done using it. For example, in the case of using a stream, we should always flush it and close it once we're done with it so that other processes may also use the stream if necessary. Now, a best practice is to actually have a separation of concerns with respect to resource management, as well as to minimize duplications as much as possible. In Java 8, the Lambda feature was introduced, and it works great for the execute around method pattern of programming for efficient resource management. Now, whenever a pair of actions has to be taken together, such as the acquisition and release of resources, for example, programmers may use a higher order function that wraps the actions around the function that is passed in as an argument. Lambdas enable functions to be treated like methods and manipulated like regular values, and in Java 8, all lambdas act as closures. Recall that a closure is an encapsulating function, whereby a closed variable is one that has a value bound to it. So with this, we can use complex lambdas to wrap classes that implement the auto-closable interface, like file input stream and buffer reader, for example. Now let's have a look at how this is done in the code sample. In lines 6 to 14, we've defined a lambda named readFile that takes a buffered reader object as input and outputs a string value. Now, the lambda wraps a buffered reader, which is a class that implements the autoclosable interface, and an autoclosable is simply an object that can hold resources until it is closed. Now, because we're using the buffered reader readLine method inside the lambda, we're making use of the execute around method pattern for extracting the paired acquire and release operations of the buffered reader resource. Now, having defined our lambda, which returns the line read from our file using the buffered reader as shown here in line 13, we can use it in the main method by calling the apply method on it, as shown in line 27, after having created our buffered reader, as shown here in the try-catch block in lines 21 to 25. So in the main method, we create a reference to an existing file on local file system, create the buffered reader, use our lambda to read the first line from that file, and then in line 28, we print that line to standard output. So let's first have a look at our text file to view its contents. Okay, so you see that we just have a few lines of lorem ipsum text. And let's now compile and run our program. And observe that the program successfully reads the first line from the file. Now, there also exists another means for encapsulating resource handling responsibilities. We can use the try with resource syntax to automatically handle the release of many resource types. So let's have a look at a code sample that uses this syntax. Okay, so observe that in lines 5 to 9, we have a method defined named readFile. And in this method, we use the try with resource syntax to create a new buffered reader instance. Then in line 7, we return a call to the readLine method on that buffered reader instance. And then in the main method, in lines 17 to 21, we use a try-catch block to call the readFile method so that we can catch the exception thrown by readLine. Now finally, in line 23, we print the line that was read from the file to standard output. So let's now compile and run this program. and observe that the program successfully reads the first line from the file. So that's it. We've just looked at a couple of examples demonstrating how to automate the release of acquired resources in Java applications.